thing we got, of course, at that moment was, in our minds, my mind particularly, was terrorism focused.
Of course,
and so I would, of course, read it that way, and that's part of the problem with this whole thing is interpretation.
Now, this one went down November 12th, 2001, or right around there.
Correct.
Yeah, and the linguistics at the time were attack on commemorative event. I remember popping out of that, and so when it happened, it was like right around Veterans Day, and which of course is the commemorative event. So the temporal marker was there. The interpretation, the parts about the aircraft were right, but there were also mixed into the language some aspects of terrorism. And by the way, the Northeast power outage was also fraught with a lot of linguistic references to terrorism.
Really? Okay. See, I'm not a believer in coincidence. And, we have 9/11, 2001, and then we have this very strange American Airlines Airbus A300, pretty reliable plane.
Very.
We get this thing going down, and now you're telling me that, part of your information may have picked up some terrorism involved.
Well, and it's only in the descriptor set. Now, whether that's just the noise that's going on.
Okay, maybe the masses believed it, right?
Yeah,
correct.
exactly.
It's a situation of the power supply issue in the Northeast where it failed. In that first instance, everybody in New York instantly thought terrorism. And that's the kind of emotional wave we picked up. Now, we were picking up a rather jumbled mess around the airplane crash, but basically there were elements involved with, of course, the military because of Veterans Day.
Right, and that occurred in 2003, that blackout, if I remember.
Correct.
Okay.
Right, August, I think it was.
Yeah, we got that by about 3 weeks. I think it was in the immediacy set that we picked that one up, and we were hunting for something. I can't remember why at the moment.
Hit part of Canada, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, Vermont. It was in that region.
Yeah, and we, by the way, even though officially it was not terrorism, we have some sources that say maybe we weren't that far off in our descriptors.
All right. Do you see clearly, Cliff and George, a distinction then when you're looking at the data between an airline crash and a huge power outage? I mean, can you clearly see that difference?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, and things coming.
For instance, let me go back only 2 years ago, maybe, or a year ago, where they had the plane issues from London, and there were those 10 planes canceled, right?
Right, when they thought, and that's what's created this problem taking liquids on planes. Okay,
we got that one, but our archetypes were that that came across as birds, and we frequently get that relative to planes because pilots and everybody think of them as birds.
And we also describe that as 10 arrows toward America.
Correct.
So that when you take birds and 10 arrows toward America, we always look at the worst case because generally the strong emotions come through. So we were wondering, okay, is this 10 airplanes coming toward America? Is it 10 birds? Is that the bird reference? George, the thing that really is difficult for us is when we Clif and I had a conversation 2 Decembers back. We had some language about the vice president and shooting.
Wounding.
And the wounding and vice president coming out, we never did anything with that because when you get into discussing something like that, and here's where you get into the problem with this looking into the future stuff, we must have talked, 3 or 4 times in a couple of hours each, Cliff, about, what do we do with this thing where the vice president and wounding, and then 2 months later...
What do you think? Naturally, you assume the vice president is to be wounded.
And wasn't doing the wounding, as came out, what was it, February, 2 months later or so?
Yeah.
Yeah, when that shooting incident involving Dick Cheney and
his friend, when he shotgun
and his friend, the lawyer down here in Texas.
Yeah, on his hunting expedition.
Right, and that's the kind of thing that you don't really want to go, out there because when you get something really sensitive that could be misinterpreted. I mean, imagine the difficulty trying to explain the complexity of the software to somebody from the Secret Service. You know, if you put something like that out about Vice President and wounding, and in advance of events, the only rational thing that most people would say is, hey, somehow these guys must be connected into the future event, rather than saying, okay, maybe really there is a way to look at future events before they happen.
Let me get this out, by the way. Bill Pinkney, 81 years old, one of the original drifters, last survivor. He's dead at the age of 81.
For heaven's sake.
I love their music. I've got it in the back there. Maybe I'll run out and get it as a little tribute to him later. Well, you know, this is incredible. And in about 10 minutes, I want to get into some of the future descriptors. How many people do you normally tap into? I guess if we had to put a number on it, Clif or George, I mean, do we know at any given time?
I can determine that, but we just don't bother usually. We know, for instance, that there's 140,000 fora of this particular kind. We know, for instance, that we're tapping into 22,000 RSS feeds, et cetera, et cetera. So we can make a guess as to approximately how many individual conversations are going on. But we don't think of it that way. We think of it as actually, because so much of it is discarded, we think of it as the number of millions of reads around the words we're looking for. So we might process through, say, 700 million data items in order to come up with 70 million that we keep and ponder over.
Absolutely incredible work. I mean, it really is.
Compared to what I did for the phone company, we would process several hundred million phone records daily.
What does Clif, and I'm going to have you address this too, George, but what does this tell you about our ability as human beings to collectively tap into something?
Or individually. It could
be one person might be able to do this.
Correct. In fact, I'm sure that there are individuals within the species that are able to do it because the diversity of the species is so wide.
Some have been on this program.
I wouldn't doubt it for a minute, yes.
But what does this tell you about that ability?
That it's rock solid, that we're not looking at humans the way we ought to, that the blinders placed on us by the modern-day concepts of science, where basically science is concerned with the electromagnetic spectra and nothing else, is very short-sighted.
George?
Yeah, I think what it really has brought back to me, George, is that we are so incredibly busy anymore as human beings. I mean, you think back to the 50s. My father was a firefighter, and he could support a family of 5 people on one person working. And today, everybody's working. Everybody's too busy. We don't spend the time in quiet contemplation getting in touch with those parts of us that can access different levels of consciousness, if you will. We're just all so pressurized by, media. We live in 10-second soundbite world, and it's hard to really connect with this stuff. And that's why Clif leads a semi-monastic vegetarian life to get the kind of concentration that it takes.
When I ask you two about some of the future descriptors, can we do it in terms of timetable? Can I say from now to 6 months out, from a year to 2 years out, and beyond? Okay. All right. That's going to be fascinating to do that. What do people say to you two when you start talking about this in groups or to friends?
Well, mostly we don't, but it's the old Igor in the white net fear.
Really?
Yeah.
And again, we don't want the black Suburban showing up loaded with guys in suits.
We have questions.
Yeah. I mean, this is when something comes up, we really do try to share it in a meaningful way.
I'm shocked, George, they haven't already done that.
Well, we're not doing anything. I mean, we're simply looking at the public internet, just like the Google spiders would do. We just happen to, instead of indexing it, we take our process.
Also, let's be really brutally frank here, okay? We're an entertainment site. That's how we bill ourselves, and we specifically are self-claimed nut jobs. Now, that eliminates a lot of
That's your disclaimer, right?
Ambiguity, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's your disclaimer right there.
Because we don't want to... Clif Clif is working hard enough on this stuff. I understand the burden that it places on him.
Bear in mind, these reports might, what, George, maybe 60, 70 pages?
Oh, no, the last one I think was 80 or 90. I mean, they're fairly long reports. And to try and explain to somebody who does not have an open mind, George, there are so many people whose minds are closed to other ways of looking at data. We just after 9/11, we responded to a DoD, a Department of Defense broad area announcement, and we were invited, if you will, to propose, and we got one quad chart, which is basically one 4-part PowerPoint slide to try and convey this whole idea. And we got a nice turn-down letter from people that use, in the defense establishment, Clif has a key patent on computer-assisted reading technology. And we also ran it up the flagpole to some defense people. But basically, they're not looking for broad view stuff. They're all going down the...
they want to know who said what to whom.
Yeah, right. They want to go down that Poindexter path. And the Poindexter path says, if you massively correlate everybody's credit card with everybody's phone call with everybody's grocery bill and who bought ammunition, you might come up with something. Our view is, why don't you just look for the emotional reaction to what happens and figure out where that's going to be? But there's not much interest in this approach. Although the Chinese, we know, are doing it with a project called Ting or the Cauldron, and they're using a supercomputer center someplace out near Lac Nord.
With a lot of people involved. We captured some of their code years ago because at one point, you have to understand, the Internet changed. At one point, it was sort of a friendly Wild West kind of a thing where if you behaved yourself, they would allow you to load your software on people's servers. There was this thing called robots.txt, and it would say, yes, you're for free to load these kinds of things and run them on our servers up to this limit. And so you could literally pop a C program or a Perl script onto somebody's machine and use their computing power for a while. And the Chinese were very fond of doing that. And so one day I just accidentally, in a run, captured a ton of their source code.
Good for you.
They're taking much bigger swaths of data. They were doing, what was in like a megabyte worth of data when they took a snip clip.
Yeah.
Sure. What do you call this? The one group has its Merlin project. We have the Global Consciousness Project. What do you call your work?
Depends on how irritated we are. I call it the ALTA report for asymmetric language translation or trend analysis.
ALTA report. I like that.
I just call it WebBots because it's too long. And when I'm writing my column on urban survival every morning about 5 a.m., it's like, WebBot project, yeah.
Feb 1st, 2003, Clif, the Space Shuttle Columbia disintegrates over Texas.
Oh, yeah.
You picked up readings. Tell me.
We started getting that at what, about maybe 6 months before?
Yeah.
We started getting, because it was a big emotional, we have this thing called the George Ure postulate that, as he stated, the longer the lead time, the bigger the event. And we started getting the emotional quantifiers about a big maritime disaster. And it just was going on for a while, and we started reporting it in the reports. And, of course, Columbia, Gem of the Ocean, that was the archetype join that brought that all together, because the descriptor set was very close to what we were actually seeing in the media post-event. But, of course, we thought of it as a maritime disaster, not a space disaster.
Right.
It's interesting about space.
And that's where the